Welcome everyone to build 66. This is actually the first O11 build that I'm putting up on the channel. I've had a lot of experience with the O11 now because we've developed a lot of distribution plates and power boards for it and the different versions. But this was actually the first O11 build that I did, and yeah, it took me some time to do one. So this is actually a themed build. It's themed after the 2007 film Sunshine. It's a space horror film. So the color scheme is black and gold. Black obviously to represent space, and the gold to represent the sun, the shield on the spacecraft, and the reflective materials used in the spacecraft and on the spacesuits. So building into the O11, what was it like? Well, you know, it's very similar to a lot of other cases, whether it's like Fractal, Fantex, Corsair. You know, the layout is slightly different, but overall the experience and the process is pretty much exactly the same. Some things that really help on the O11 is having, you know, you can take the whole front panel off so you can get your hands in the front, also in the top. So being able to get in from three sides really makes a massive difference when you are building. Like even just to get in from one extra side, not just from the side panel, makes a huge difference. So that is certainly very helpful. But what made this build unique and different was the power board. So we actually designed a power board for the original O11, not the Evo, because they just changed too much. Like all of the different O11s are quite different. They would all need a different power board, and we don't want to make different power boards for every single one. A lot of people ask about this, but basically we don't want to take the risk making too many products for other people's products, because then if they change something, discontinue it, yeah, it becomes a problem. But coming from somebody who spent the better part of their life doing custom cables, like the first 10 years, the biggest part of building a system was the custom cables, because we would customize all of the cables from the ground up. So being able to do all of the cables in like 5 to 10 minutes, you can see that I'm plugging in the PSU to power board cables here, is just an amazing experience, and there's no going back for me. Like sleeving cables, it's fine if you do it once every couple of years on your own build. It feels like a great achievement. You know, it's great looking at the build when it's done thinking I did all of that, but when you're doing it every day, you are constantly thinking of a way of improving to not do that anymore, because there are so many things that I would rather be doing than sleeving cables and doing cable management, such as designing more products, such as doing like mods, custom painting. You know, pretty much anything aside from custom cables is just a huge time sink. So getting away from that with the power board, and also they are insanely expensive. I'm not talking about cable mod, but if you're going to do MDPCX custom cables, hand built, you're going to spend a lot, mainly if you do all of the cables, not just the core component cables. So yeah, that made this build a lot of fun, just being able to, you know, click a few cables in and then it's all done. And also the distribution plate, which we also designed for this case, it fits with the power board. And you know, you can see we have a nice big one at the back here, but if I were to try to fit a large pump res combo in this with like a 200mm reservoir, it would have become quite cramped, and you know, it would have been difficult to fit. This case is actually quite space restrictive. Like based on how popular it is and how many people are doing liquid cooling into it, I expected a little bit more when it comes to radiator capacity. So these are only 44mm thick radiators, but the bottom one is covering up the motherboard, heating connectors on the motherboard, preventing things from being plugged in. Also the GPU, which is the Asus TUF 4090 with an EK water block with an active backplate, was a lot too wide for the case. So I actually had to modify the side panel window, completely remove the original and replace it with an acrylic one, which I spaced out by 16mm so that the GPU would fit. And you can see the thread inserts on the side of the case for that. Another small snag that I ran into, which I should have realized, is the active backplate hit the NVMe heatsink, the stock one that goes on the motherboard, so I had to put a custom one on there, which you can see. But that is a common problem with active backplates you have to watch out for. Sometimes you just have to remove the stock NVMe heatsinks from your motherboard and do something else, or maybe just not even use that slot. So building the loop now, and I thought that it was a good time to talk about how difficult it is to actually get tube into fittings. It is the simple things like this that you just completely overlook, people overlook, but when I'm talking to customers every day, this is one of the things that keeps coming up. So there are two things that you can do to make this a little bit easier. One is doing a very good chamfer on the tube. So get yourself a good chamfering tool and chamfer it well, and also use O-ring grease, and definitely use O-ring grease every time, and put it on the tube. You can wipe off the excess afterwards. Do not get it inside of the tube, only put it on the outside of the tube, and that's why I say not to put it inside of the fittings, because then it might get inside of the tube. You don't want that in your loop. So that is definitely going to make it a lot easier, and use food grade O-ring grease. That is important. You don't want anything that could melt things and damage the tube. And that brings me to another subject which still comes up a lot, which is PETG. So people asking me every day, like, which one is better? I really don't understand the point of PETG. It doesn't make building loops any easier. Like, just because it's softer, it doesn't mean that it's easier to build the loop. It just means that it bends a little bit more quickly when you heat it. But it doesn't have as good clarity. Because it's softer, it's easier to damage. It doesn't bend as well because it deforms more easily. And also there's another problem with it, which is I've seen it over time in a lot of cases. It can actually shrink inside of the fittings because it's so soft. And this is obviously a very bad, insidious problem, because at some point it's going to shrink enough where your build just starts leaking randomly from every single fitting. So that is absolutely the last thing you would want. So this is just my experience with PETG so far. Personally, I will always avoid it and use acrylic. It takes a little bit longer to heat it when you're bending. I use 360 degrees. And the amount of time that you hold it over the heat for depends how far away it is from the heat. But you don't want to go too close. You want to be about probably an inch away, rotating it quite quickly. And just keep testing. As soon as it is bendable, that's when it's ready. But if you start bending it and it kinks, it's still not quite ready. So just keep heating it until you can bend it to 90 degrees without any stretch marks or kinks. If you go too far with the heat, it'll start bubbling, and then that piece of tube is ruined. So some of you will be thinking why I didn't use gold fittings, because it would have been a perfect opportunity, but we just thought it would be too much bling. The theme needed to be subtle, and the gold pearl custom paint job I think was enough bling. And with RGB, you really don't need that much color. Like you can see, once the lights are on, you have plenty of color, and I think the gold fittings would have just left no room for like the darkness of space and creating a bit of contrast.